Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by my new friend, Tia Smith, who is a podcaster herself. Her podcast is called The Thinning of the Veil. And my husband and I were honored to be guests on your podcast a few weeks ago. And I'm so delighted that you would come and talk to us about the unique experiences that you've had surrounding grief as it pertains particularly to some very special people in your life that have now gone on to the other side of the veil.
Of course. It was so much fun last interviewing you and your husband. I just thought this is so unique, and I had so much fun. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Tia. Would you start with a life sketch?
Sure. It's a little complicated, but I am originally born 7 original children from my mother and father. And then when I was 9, they divorced. And so we kind of lived back and forth, half brothers and sisters, step brothers and sisters. My dad was married a total of 7 times. So that was fun. And that will play into later.
Okay.
Because we're going to be talking about my father today for part of the time. But then I went to college at Rick's College, aka BYU, Idaho, and met my husband, got married, and very, very, very soon after that, started my journey of motherhood. And I have 6 children total, 4 on this side of the veil and 2 on the other side of the veil or in the spirit world, and which is also a part of my story as well. And I have 4 grandchildren, which is my most favoriteest part of everything.
Yes.
So much fun.
Yes.
And I am currently living in Cache Valley, Utah, and I stay busy with my children, my grandchildren, and then I have this Thinning of the Veil podcast that has just kind of now is like another child in my life,
Right.
it seems like. So yeah, that's how I keep busy, and it just seems like it's hard to get a breath sometimes. So yeah.
I know. I'm so glad I was able to pin you down for an hour so that we could talk.
I am too. It's good to talk about these things. I think sometimes we don't revisit them for a lot of different reasons. So I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to be able to, I guess, give my perspective, because this plays huge into what I'm currently doing now, which is the thinning of the veil, and experiences, those sacred experiences that we have with others who have passed on the other side of the veil, and within the context of how does that help in the grieving process? Because I believe it's a gift that can be given from time to time to help us walk this journey of grief.
I totally agree. And thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that you will share with us. So would you start with, who would you like to speak to first?
I think it's good for me to maybe start off with the loss of my twins, my children, because they were first, and that was my first experience with grief. I believe, you have your regular occurrences when you're children of like losing grandparents. And I don't know, you kind of feel separated from that sometimes. I mean, you've lost, but I don't know if I fully grasped the concept of grieving. I mean, they're not in your lives as much, and maybe sometimes for other people they were, but for me, they were in my life from time to time. And if it was definitely sad, but it wasn't as personal as saying losing my children. So fast forward, I get married. I have my first 2 children, and I have a disease called cystic fibrosis, which I didn't know at the time, but you're born with it. So it took a lot of trying, not with the first one. The first one was super soon, and I knew that God was totally in that one. But after that, I had such a hard time with getting pregnant.
Mm.
So I had 2 boys, and then we were trying to expand our family some more. And we were at this time, we were also going through very, very stressful situation within our marriage.
Mhm.
My husband had burned his legs in nitric acid, and it was just a constant in our life where it was something that we had to address every single day.
Right.
It led to, I mean, a lot of caretaking, obviously, but also um, a lot of addiction and everything like that. So we were going through it, trying to do the best we could, um, trying to navigate that all. And so when we began trying for this third baby, um, we had just kind of gotten over some things in our marriage that were pretty hard to work through.
Mhm.
But we were on the positive up from that. And so and we'd been trying for such a long time. So when I got pregnant, and for some reason, and this is the only time that this has ever happened to me, but I felt like I knew the exact time frame when I got pregnant. Like I
Wow.
just felt it within my bones. And from the very beginning, I knew that it was a different pregnancy. I knew that there was something different about it. And of course, I was excited and happy because we'd been trying for a while. And I went to the doctor and I said, I think that there's twins in there. And he goes, oh, no, 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 I'm sure not. So they do the regular ultrasound and they can't find it. But I was pretty insistent with him. And he decided to do a different kind of ultrasound that was a little more pinpointing on what was going on in there.
Mhm.
And sure enough, they found, 2 babies in there. And for me, I was excited. I have twin sisters. I
Oh.
have cousins who are twins. I have um, aunts and uncles who are twins. Like, there's just twins everywhere in my family. I didn't think I was going to be the twin mom, though. I thought one of my twin sisters would be.
Uh-huh.
So I was super excited. And I immediately just jumped the gun and started buying, because I had 2 boys, and I was, crossing my fingers for a girl.
Right.
And so I started buying like 2 dresses of each thing, and like, and this is before I knew what the sex was of
Right.
each one. But the interesting thing was that in my womb, I could tell the personalities were completely different.
Wow.
Baby A was just super active. Like, and I didn't know it was she at the time, but I will call her she now, but
Mhm.
super active, and um, had such a like flighty personality, if that makes any sense.
Wow, yeah.
Baby B was just calm
Mm.
and happy to let baby A take front stage all the time, and
Mhm.
I could just sense that they were different.
Like Jacob and Esau.
Yeah, that's totally it. That's such a good way of explaining that, because that's what it felt like. And I could tell that um there was something special about this. And I honestly thought that this was a gift from God, because
Yeah.
we had kind of worked through some pretty hard things in our marriage. And
Right.
so I just thought that this was God saying, hey, I got you. Right. So
Right,
there was so
right,
much hope filled with it.
right. You figured it out. You're gonna have
Yes.
this beautiful family. You're
Yeah.
solid.
Solid. Everything's going to be good. And then at about, I would say 17, 16 weeks, one, um, one of my, so they were fraternal twins. And um, I still didn't know like what sex they were, but they were fraternal. And so that meant that they were in 2 different sex. So about 16, 17 weeks, I think it was 17 weeks, I started losing amniotic fluid pretty
Oh,
quickly.
no.
And I started panicking. The doctor put me on bed rest. And again, at the time, I have 2 little boys, that are needing their mom, but you just kind of figure it out. Um, and then about 2 weeks after that, so about 19 weeks, I I'm rushed to the hospital. It was New Year's Eve. And I was rushed to the hospital with just excessive amounts of bleeding, and just, something was happening. And what had happened was there was a hole in the amniotic sac that was just kind of leaking. And they were hoping that by bed rest, it would close itself back up. Well, 19 weeks starts to happen. And, there's so much trauma related to these situations. And you're just kind of taking it one step at a time.
Right.
And so we go to the hospital, and the doctor says, well, we're going to have to deliver one of them. And I was obviously panicking because that's the worst thing you can hear
Right.
at that phase and
Right.
stage. And so I decided to, well, I actually didn't have a choice. They're just kind of walking me through it. And the baby A was born. And I asked him, I said, can you tell what the sex of the baby is? And he said, it's a little girl.
Oh,
And in
but
that
you
moment,
knew.
yeah. And in that moment, the loss of losing my little girl was just more than I could take. And they asked me something. They said, do you want to see her? And every parent's decision is different. And I think maybe if I would go back now and do it over again, I would do something different. But they said, do you want to see her? In my mind, though, she had been dying, for lack of a better word, for 2 weeks inside of me. And I didn't want to see a deteriorated version of my daughter.
Right.
I wanted to keep the image that I had in my head.
Right.
And so they took her away, and immediately they just kept me in the hospital from then on, because baby B was still, his sac was fine. Everything was good. And they would just give me shots every single day. And that was 4 more weeks that I was just in the hospital.
And your little boys
And my
are
little
at
boys are at
home.
home, and my husband is trying to take care of both of us and we did have outside family members helping, which was very, very helpful. But in my mind, I was thinking, okay, the only reason why I think that I was managing it was that I thought, okay, there's no way that God is going to take this other
Both.
one.
Yes.
Yeah, because he would have taken one with the other. I mean,
Right.
otherwise, what would have been the point except for torture?
Especially knowing or feeling that this was a gift.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Why?
So it's
Yeah.
the only thing in my mind that I could grasp onto or make sense of at the
Right.
time. And then about 23 weeks, which is like very, very minimum viability, his heart rate started dipping. And it was, I started panicking again. In fact, so much that they had to knock me out because they had to deliver him and C-section. And it was the vertical C-section. So because he was so small and they had to get him. So they had to put me out just because I was mentally and emotionally falling apart.
Right.
And was not able to comprehend what was happening, because I was just exhausted from 2 or 3 weeks in the hospital trying to keep him in. And all of a sudden this bubble had burst of, okay, well, at least I have one baby. And so they delivered him, and obviously immediately put him in the NICU. They realized fairly quickly. I was able to kind of go down and see him, I think twice. And then the nurse said to me, he knows who you are. He's covered in wires and everything. And she says, because every time you come and you grab his hand and talk to him, we are able to turn his oxygen down. And so she's like, there was a bond there that I had with him.
That
I was so
started in the
tired.
womb. It started in the womb.
Yeah.
How could he have known your voice
Right.
if he had not heard it
Exactly.
in the womb? He knew his mother.
Yeah. And that in itself kind of gave me a little bit of hope. Okay, he's processing who I am. Like, he's a fighter. But they realized very quickly that this was McCady in Ogden, and they transferred him up to primary children's because he was too much. he needed more specialized care. And I had just had a C-section. I had just been in the hospital. And so they transferred him up there in in an ambulance. And me and my husband followed behind. We got there a little bit later because it took a while for me to gather up my things, to get dressed. And we go up to the hospital and we're sitting there, and the doctor comes in and he says, I have some bad news. He didn't develop an artery in his leg. The best way to describe it was the Wicked Witch of the West, when the house lands on her.
Oh, yeah.
His legs were just kind of curling up and dying.
Oh.
And he wasn't even a pound. And
Oh.
so he says, we'll have to amputate from the waist down.
Oh,
And
my.
he says, but that's a decision that you need to make. And never in my life have I ever been placed in such a position that goes against every grain in your body. My husband knew what the right thing to do was. I could not make that decision because essentially you're killing your child, even though you're not, right? It was just like, he's not going to survive that operation.
Right.
Clearly, we need to let him go, but I didn't know how to do that.
Right.
It's the hardest, worst decision I have ever made, because essentially you feel like you're giving up on them after fighting for them for so long.
Right.
And I was mad at the time because in the bassinet in the room next to my son was another baby who was starting to actually come out of it. And, the mom was like a drug addicted.
Of course.
Right. And so I'm like,
Right.
wait a second. Like, I'm a good person. I'm trying to do the right thing. I believe in God. I believe in the Savior. And
I have a good marriage.
yes, all of these things were happening. And it was just so overwhelming. But we decided to just let him go. The only thing I didn't want was for him to be in pain. So they gave him enough medicine that he wouldn't be in pain, and then just put him in my arms and pulled him off of everything. And so I don't even know the time that he lapsed, but it took, it seemed like forever, but it probably wasn't forever for him to pass. And I was devastated in that moment. I was just so mad and angry and tired and all of the above.
Right.
We left the hospital, and I was just fit to be tied. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know what was going on. My husband and I decided to go up to Logan at the time and just rent a hotel room and just kind of process it on our own. In the meantime, no one in the family really had got to see him, because it all happened so fast. Now, my father, my son was named Logan Van Smith after my dad. And my dad was like the best grandpa. You can ask any of his grandkids. They just adored and loved him. But he wanted to see him. He was on his way. And I had just called and told him, he passed. He's like, I don't care. Will you please tell them to wait so that I can see my grandson? And so he drove up there. I wasn't there at the time when he got there. And then started the whole ordeal of trying to process that grief. And I mean, there were so many disappointments in it. There was so much hope that was shattered. There was nothing was making sense at the time. I don't know what your other guests say, but as soon as that happens, you almost want to scream at the world, because they're going like about their normal lives.
Yes.
And you're screaming, there is nothing normal about this.
Exactly.
The pain, the empty arms, you are literally having this extreme emotional reaction, physical reaction to this very hard thing. And everyone's around you, you think, just trying to process it. So we decided to just, you go through the whole funeral situation, and you spend most of your time making others feel better about your situation.
Right.
Super exhausting.
Yes.
And I was trying to be grateful that I still had 2 boys here that needed me, that obviously had also been through their own trauma with me in the hospital. And we only had Logan's body. We didn't have Morgan's body. The hospital just took it. And so we were just going through this. It was mind numbing. I don't even know. It was kind of like a dream almost.
Yeah.
But I was not taking it very well. I was not processing it very well. I felt let down by God. I felt like, what was the point of all of that?
Right.
You could have just taken them at the same time.
Right.
I could have been saved from the physical trauma of C-sections and everything and shots every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think with that loss of grief, that being the first time, and I think it's interesting because sometimes you're grieving the loss of the memories that you had. With the twins, I was grieving the loss of the memories that I never got.
Yes.
And it was so extreme. I can very, very distinctly remember just sliding down my kitchen counter, just trying to make dinner for the boys, just overcome with so much grief and pain and anger. Anger was, man, I was mad, you know?
Right.
And I don't think I let a lot of people in at the time. I didn't think that there was a lot of people I felt like that could understand me.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think some people stayed away from me because they didn't know how to comfort me. But there was a lot of family members who stepped up and helped with the funeral. I don't know. It was a lot of grieving on my own. I think at the time, my husband and I were grieving differently, and I was upset at the way he was grieving.
Right. Right. That's very common. I think I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Where you feel like you don't care because you're not showing this particular emotion.
Right.
And we didn't really talk about it between the two of us. I don't know if we didn't know how or we didn't want to.
Or you were
But
just both in so much pain
yes,
that
yeah,
that would have required more than you physically or emotionally could have done. Maybe.
yeah. And at the time, you don't realize that. You're not logical in your mind, but you're just kind of feeling it. And the interesting thing is, right after the funeral, I ended up back up in the hospital because I had contracted an infection in my uterus from the C-section and everything. And it was super bad. And I remember just saying, just let me go. I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I want to go see my children.
Right. Especially to have to go back to the scene of your greatest sorrow.
Yeah. I'm like, really? And that was the anger part. I'm going to have to keep going through this over and over again as if I haven't got through it enough,
Right.
you know? So I feel like within that loss, it's 2 different experiences. The loss of my children. And when you lose a child, grief is mourning anyone's loss, but I feel like it's different in different ways for different situations. And that's what I've learned.
Right.
Is that the only thing that I kept holding on to was, even though I was mad about God or mad at God, the promise was that I would see them again and that I didn't stop being their mom. And that was the only thread that I could grab onto during that time.
Right.
I think time helps a lot in moving away from that. But if you really never deal with it, then it's just kind of like shoving it kind of down into the recesses of like the dark parts of your soul where,
Right.
You may not want to touch it for a little while.
That's absolutely true. I mean, that's the thing about trauma, right? The thing about trauma is that our brains process it in present time. It's always present time until we are able to, with our logical mind, work through what has happened. So it shouldn't be a surprise that just time doesn't heal the wound.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
and no one tells you how to grieve.
Yeah.
It is an interesting thing that it is the commonality that everyone in the world shares. You know,
Yes.
we are born and we die.
Yes.
And it really, there is no like education. Although I think it would be hard. You don't know it until you go through it, right?
Right.
But it is interesting to me how different cultures deal with death in different ways. Um, and so it's just kind of like you're winging it at the time.
Right.
You
Right.
know what you know, which is for me, I knew that I was still their mom and that they were still involved in my life. I didn't know how that looked and I didn't know what that looked like. But I just feel like I immediately afterward started trying to get pregnant again, which is, I think, my way of just feeling that empty arm loss
Right.
situation.
Right.
And then thankfully, you know, I had my daughter born. I have, so there's, including the twins, there was 4 boys and 2 girls.
Mhm.
So she became like my only living daughter on this side of the veil. So that helped in a way. Not that it replaced the guilt and the anxiousness and the sadness, but it filled my empty arms to a certain extent, and that gave me peace. And then you just kind of still go on with your life, kind of just do what you do what's necessary. You mother and your other children and try to be the best wife you can, all the while not really dealing with that particular trauma.
Right. Do you feel like you kind of tried to jump over the
Oh,
grief?
100% I did. I
Okay.
tried to because I didn't like the way that I was feeling.
Hmm.
It's not comfortable
Right.
to feel grief. Um, and I felt like if I stayed in it too long, I would not be able to, you know, be a mother to my other children.
Right.
There are times, I think the times that I recognize them or think about them the most is at the time my sister-in-law was we were supposed to be having babies at the same time.
Mm.
And so that was another like a slap in the face. You know,
Yeah.
why can this child be born and why are you taking mine and all of
Right.
those things. But in the moment, the only logical, even though it's not logical, but to me it was logical thing that I could do was throw my sister-in-law a baby shower.
Wow.
And it was in that moment of thinking outside myself and self-focused and turned outward to others that was healing in a certain way, even though it's
Mhm.
counterintuitive.
Right.
Um, but I look at her, my niece now, for different milestones or mile markers. Oh, the twins would be doing this. Oh, they might be married and having their own children. So it's living kind of through her, watching what her life is doing and saying, okay, that this is what would be happening. Um, and that was the only thing I had to grasp onto until I lost my father. And then that's kind of when the veil started getting thinner and thinner for me. And I
Explain
was,
what you mean by that.
what I mean by that is feeling those on the other side of the veil involved in my life in one form or another, receiving messages, for lack of a better word, from
Mhm.
heaven
Right.
in certain, like whether it's dreams, whether it's a feeling, whether it has been words come to my mind. Um, and this started happening after I started addressing death. right? When I started processing it for what it is, it's just a movement to another space. And it's not, I believe it's not a permanent situation, that is
Right.
just moving from one space to another space. And that really started happening to me when I was actually at the scene of an accident in 2009. And I didn't know the lady, it was just me and my husband. And her name was Luann. We didn't know at the time, but she was attempting to cross the road, and there was a semi gravel truck coming. And I don't know if she didn't see it because we were on the opposite side of the road. So we were basically looking at each other. We were both waiting for that gravel truck to pass. And for some reason, she decided to go too soon.
Oh.
And that gravel truck hit her. And it was so bad. I mean, there's glass everywhere. Her car was over in the ditch. Anyways, so my husband went to go check on her to see if she was all right. We're the only ones there. I called 911, and we live just a couple minutes from the hospital. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, like they're just going to get there. Like I wasn't contemplating what was about to happen, just because I thought, okay, people are get here and they're going to
Yeah.
help.
Right.
My husband went to her side of the door. I'm going through her stuff, trying to find her name and trying to tell the 911, I know I find her purse. And my husband very quickly is traumatized because of his skin grafts and
Right.
nitric acid and all of that. So we switched places, and he's up on the road talking to 911 and waiting for the ambulance to get there. And I go over, and I think I was given grace in that moment to be able to do what I was doing, because it wasn't a very good visual situation. But
Mm-hmm.
I put my arm around her and I'm telling her it's okay. The ambulance is going to get here. And she's kind of taking these breaths, and I'm thinking, oh, good. Like, she's breathing.
Right.
Through a series of events, it's taking the ambulance, a whole lot longer to get there than we anticipated. And so I kept talking to her, rubbing her shoulder, telling her to hold on. And all of a sudden, both my husband and I, felt this shift. We felt this like explosion of love
Wow.
that I can't even describe it. It permeated every part of our being. And we both looked at each other. It was like a bomb went off of just love
And you
that
both were
felt
feeling
it
it at the
at
same
the same
time?
time. And he's up on the
Wow.
road and I'm in the car, and I look up at him and he looks up at me and he's like, what was that? And in
Wow.
that moment, I think that's when she passed. Not soon after that, the ambulance get there, and then it's just crazy. They kind of take over. They bring us up. The police are asking us to give witness statements. The ambulance pulls me in the back, pulls me to the back of the ambulance, into the ambulance, and just says, hey, are you okay? Checking on me, because this is a very traumatic thing to witness.
Right.
And I said, oh, I think I'm good. I think I'm fine. Like, I'm just feeling bad for her in the moment and in the situation. I then go home, and I'm sitting on my couch, and it just hits me, and I just lose it, and I'm crying, I'm sobbing. Someone just died in my arms, and I'm feeling bad for the family. I'm
Mhm.
just, again, you're in that space of grieving, but I don't know this lady.
Right.
Um, and then I felt her arms around me, and
Wow.
she gave me the biggest hug. And for me, in our religion, in the way that what I believe, she wrapped her arms around me. I felt it very, very strongly. And she
Mm.
said, you need to get back to the temple. And
Wow.
what that means for us is that's a religious place where we go to worship God and make covenants with him. And we had not done that in a long time. We had
Mhm.
just trying to grind out life with all the hard
Mhm.
things.
Right.
So I made the decision to do that, and I took the steps necessary. And that was my first real, very poignant, what I call thinning of the veil experience, where someone from the other side, we are eternally wrapped together. I was there when she passed. We were there when she passed. But we felt her presence as she was leaving and also
Right.
afterward.
Wow.
And so that opened my eyes to the possibility of this guidance and comfort and cooperation from those whose lives we are entwined with on the other side of the veil in various different ways.
Right.
So that put me on a path of kind of trying to understand that. And at the time I lost my twins, I read everything I could on the spirit world. I tried because I want to know where my kids are at.
Right.
I want to
Right.
know where my babies are and what they're experiencing. So 1999 is when I lost the twins. 2009 is when I had the experience with Luann.
Wow. 10 years later.
Yeah. Now, fast forward almost a year later, my father and I have I'm just going to say that, have a very
Uh-huh.
close relationship. After the divorce, it just got complicated and messy. And my father and I think one of the reasons why is 'cause I'm the oldest. We
Mm.
bonded really well. I mean, I guess I was always the daddy's girl, but for some reason after that, and I became like, because I was the oldest child, I became the one responsible, quote unquote, for my younger brothers and sisters, even
Right.
though they weren't that much younger than me.
Right.
But I felt that responsibility, and we kind of connected on that level. And so um, I just, we were just super close. So I had children. He's the best grandpa. He would load up, he had these white van buses, because what he did for a living. The interesting thing, when I was a kid, I would tell everyone that my dad owned the Van's shoe company because his name was Van and his last name was Campbell. So we also owned the Campbell Soup Company.
Oh, that's funny.
But in
That's
reality,
funny.
he ran shelter homes, which is
Oh,
places for
wow.
those who are mentally ill or mentally handicapped, in state
Wow.
custody, or the family just couldn't take care of them. And we just ran these shelter homes. So ever since I was a kid, I was around people with disabilities. And
Mhm.
he taught us so many things about loving unconditionally.
Wow.
And I think that's why I got so close to my dad, is that I never felt judged by him. He always loved us. So he would treat the grandkids the same way that he treated his clients, and load them up on a bus. And probably none of it was legal. I don't think any of us had any of them had seatbelts on. But we drove to the dollar store, and he would just let them all out and give them all like $2. They'd buy treats,
Oh.
and then they'd load up and they'd go to movies at the theater. So my children were very, very close to him. I was very, very close to him. And this was Father's Day of June 2010. And nothing out of the ordinary. He's 61, I believe,
Oh,
at
yeah.
the time. So pretty
Young.
young.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my husband and I decided to go up to Yellowstone Park. That is one of my most favorite places, just because my dad and mom took me there when I was little. And so it just became this place that we'd love to go. So we get on our motorcycle and head to Yellowstone, my husband and I, for Father's Day, because I had taken my father out to lunch, gave him his present,
Mhm.
and just said, "Love you, Dad." I could tell that he was struggling a little bit, but it was a stressful time for him. So I just thought, okay, whatever. So we went into Yellowstone, my husband and I, and we stayed at the old inn, the Old Faithful Inn, and
Mm.
so we had this wonderful time. And when it was time to start heading back, we stopped at the gas station right there next to Old Faithful. And waiting for it to open because we needed some gas. And all of a sudden, I see this car pull up. I'm like, wait a second, I think that's my dad's Jeep. And Darren's like, no, there's no way. And I said, no, I really think that's my dad's Jeep. So he pulls up and he's not looking. He's I don't know, he's just laser focused on something and I don't even know what it is. So he doesn't see us. So I kind of look and I'm like, wait a second, is that my dad? So I went and I knocked on the window and turns out it was my dad. He had gone up to Yellowstone because he was having a very hard time and had actually sat the whole night in the Old Faithful Inn, the same place what we were, because that's his happy place.
Wow.
Gets up in the morning and is waiting just like us to maybe put gas in the car or get something to eat. And as soon as he rolled the window down, I could tell that something was off. And I immediately got concerned. He was disheveled. The car was just disheveled, and maybe that's not abnormal for him, but everything was off, and I was very, very concerned. So I said, hey, Dad, why don't you come in and we'll get you some breakfast? So thankfully, I think a little bit, he was just like, didn't want to bug us, but he came in anyways, and we ordered breakfast. I'm talking to him, trying to understand where he's at, and he leaves to go to the bathroom, and I just start crying. And Darren's like, what's wrong? I said, he's not good. Something is off. Something is wrong. I don't know what it is. I gathered myself together enough that when he came back, I just said, hey, do you want to go on like a hike? And he kind of was like, no. And I said, yeah, why don't we go on a hike together? I mean, it's Father's Day. What a great opportunity. And so we went to this spot, which I actually had never been, and we go on a hike. And Darren had the presence of mind at that time, which is my husband, to take pictures of what was going on. And so it's just, so he's my husband isn't involved in the conversation at all. We're walking ahead of him and he's taking pictures. And this whole walk was him expressing sorrow for the stress that we experienced as children for choices made. He was saying sorry about all of the things that he did. He was kind of bearing his soul to me. And we walk up to this beautiful waterfall, and he's just climbing on the rocks, and he just sits on the rocks, and you could tell he is doing a review of sorts. Like he's just not present in the moment, but reflecting upon the past, where he's at, how he's feeling, all of those things. And that was what he expressed to me, both walking in and walking out. And I was still concerned. This is not normal for my dad.
Right.
And he just wasn't normal. So when we get done with that, and that took about an hour and a half, 2 hours, he said to me, well, I think I'm just going to go sit by the river. And I was panicking. I'm like, no, why don't we go do something else? Why don't, whatever. And he goes, no. I want to sit by the river and read a book, which is what his favorite thing to do was. So he decided to do that. And we just thought, well, there's nothing else we can do.
Were you afraid that he was going to hurt himself or?
Kind of. I just knew that something wasn't right.
Right.
And when we got back on the motorcycle, Darren and I, to head back home, Darren says to me, do you feel that? And I said, yeah. I'm never going to see my dad alive again.
Wow.
And he's like, that's what I feel too. So it got to the point to where we got home. I was calling my stepmom. Is he okay? He's not home yet. I'm like, I'm worried about him. He eventually got home, and I kind of had talked to him, but there was still this like foreboding feeling, and I kept asking him, are you okay? And he goes, I'm fine. So that was in June. So August 1st, we went up to my brother was blessing his baby in our church. We give children a name and a blessing. And all of the family was there. And I walked in late, which for me It doesn't happen very often. But so we had to sit in the back. So my dad turned around and saw me walk in, gave me a big smile. And then he turned forward. They get up, they bless the baby, they sit down. We start partaking of the sacrament, which is another ceremonial rite in our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As soon as that was over, my sister stands up and says, "Is there a doctor in the congregation?" They get my dad, they carry him out to the foyer. Now remember, all of his family's there.
Wow.
Grandchildren, children, were all standing there watching what was going on. They had a defibrillator at the time, and they used it. There was nurses and doctors there that just happened to be there that were working on him. My brother was also working on him. And this whole time we're watching him. And I think everyone around me was filled with hope, but I knew differently. They load him into the ambulance. We follow them to the hospital. And my brother says to me, "Why do I not feel like it's going to be okay?" And I said, "Because it's not." I said, "He's done. He wants to go home." And so he had a massive heart attack and died right there. I mean, luckily we had some help. People were like grabbing the kids and trying to take them to another room, because watching that all happen is traumatic in and of itself. Right. So, then you start that grieving process again. Now, I think the thing that was different this time was that I wasn't self-grieving. I had children who were grieving. I had brothers and sisters who were grieving. So the grief was spread out.
Right. Shared.
Which was a little bit easier. Although it was difficult because it was unexpected and he was so young. Right. But I noticed that my grieving was a little bit better this time. Not that, because now I was living the loss of memories had. Right. And, all of the what ifs. He's not going to be around for this. He's not going to be around for that. All of the major important things. But I had just gone through that experience with Luann. That said, your experiences with your dad does not have to remain past.
Right.
It can still exist in the present, and you can still mentor that relationship. So what I did with him is I just felt this really huge pull to start working on his family history. I was entering in his pictures into Family Search. You can do that in Ancestry. But I felt like every time I did that, I was keeping his memory alive. I was re-experiencing him, right? The relationship was becoming stronger. And as I did that, I also learned stuff about my dad that I had never experienced. So it was healing to me. It was healing to not let his voice die, to not let the memory of him die.
Right.
Knowing that if I did this work, even his grandchildren who would never know him in this life because they were born after he died, would have a place that they could go to experience their grandfather, his past, what he loved, his pictures, his personality. It was all there. And so I felt in control of my grief at that point, meaning I was experiencing it the way that I wanted to experience it and not spiraling. That makes sense.
I love that.
It was truly comforting. And so then I didn't stop with my dad. I started putting in all this information about my grandparents, which then reignited that relationship with them.
Yes, yes.
So through that, and through doing that work, I started having a thinning of the veil experiences with my father, through dreams and other ways, and then also with my children. My children's experience was singular in and of itself, and I don't know if I'm going to go into that right now. But I finally, I am literally mothering them from this side of the veil. We are completely involved in one another's lives, but it's because of that work that I've involved myself in, which is family history work and temple work. So it's like our lives the lines in our lives keep crossing. They don't need to stop just because someone's not there.
That's exactly what came to my mind while you were speaking. I started in my mind thinking of this woven tapestry.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And as you were talking about, and Family Search is a wonderful site. I think it's familysearch.org.
Correct.
And it's free. Anyone can get an account and start to input their family history, right? You start with yourself, your information, and you can build these generations and really see how connected that you are. And I love what you're saying about adding memories and photos as much as possible, bringing your father to life for his children, grandchildren.
Well, and one of the cool things is I think when you lose someone, you miss their voice, right? We hang on to like their voicemail recordings or whatever. The cool thing about Family Search is you can add voice to it as well, so that I can at any time, my children can at any time, my grandchildren at any time can go hear his voice. And he's still present at that point in time.
Right.
And it was just such a huge blessing for me. And then I started doing that with the twins. Now I don't have a lot of stuff for them. Thankfully, Primary Children's, which was so awesome. I got this box in the mail about a week later. They had done a cast of his hand. And they had sent the dress because they didn't have any boy stuff that was small enough that he had passed in, and his wires and his bassinet, all of that came in. So I was able to kind of put that information in there. And I haven't quite broached putting in the story about them and how I felt and what the experience from my point of view into Family Search. But I think that's next on my list of things to tackle, is to help them come alive as well in that.
I think that is so beautiful. It's so beautiful because in one aspect, sometimes we gather memories because we don't want to forget the person. Yeah. But if you believe, as I know you and I both do, that they have transitioned, they continue to exist. They exist in a different sphere and plane than how we are existing right now. But then you're not necessarily just keeping from forgetting them, because they are still, they aren't, it's not they were, they are, they continue.
Yeah.
And I love that.
It's beautiful too, because one person in the family may have access to all of the pictures and whatever, but if you can get those pictures and upload them into Family Search, then it doesn't matter. Then any one of their descendants can access it, and anyone who feels like they want to know more about them can access it.
Right.
And I believe that bond that I have with my father and with my children is stronger than it has ever been. And that's been the beautiful thing to me, is that I can still mother my two children just in a little bit of a different way, but the result is the same. And that bond that we share is very alive and well. And after grieving for so long the loss of the twins and not doing that very well, I would say, just doing the best that I can, just willing myself through it, it has been a beautiful gift. And it's also comforting in some way to know that my father is there, being the grandfather to those two little ones that that are probably so grateful that they're there experiencing that together. And
Right.
oftentimes they will come together. The twins and my father, when I'm getting visits from time to time, will come together, meaning that that familial bond isn't broken. It continues on, and their concern for me and their love for me is even more than I can comprehend, because they see things in a different way now than they could when they were here. So, and that is how one of the reasons why the podcast started was, as I was doing all of these family history things and having not only with my dad and with children, with people whose work that I was working on, different messages coming from the other side. This was regularly occurring to me on a very regular basis. So I started realizing that when you're involved in the work that they're involved in, according to our belief, then it's like you're working together, and they have more reasons to visit you, more reasons to,
Right.
help you with whatever you're involved with. So it's just been quite an extraordinary thing. And what I realized is that I'm not the only one having these experiences. There are people that I don't even know, who I'm just meeting, like you, who are having these, quote, thinning of the veil experiences that help us to live more fully here and fulfill the mission we believe we were called and sent here to do.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up. And to clarify that for somebody who may not be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's
yeah,
our faith background.
yeah,
But of
yeah,
course, everyone experiences grief, and our beliefs can really have a huge impact on how we grieve.
mm-hmm.
But for us, our understanding is that we are intimately interconnected, not just with one another, but even with God, who we know as our Heavenly Father, right?
Yep,
And that the purpose of this life is to have mortal experiences, interact with each other, um, and ultimately for us to choose Christ, follow His path, follow His way as families.
correct.
Not just as individuals, but we are meant to be in community, in family. And so when we refer to things like temple work, what we're referring to is the work of knowing who we come from, who our ancestors are, who is part of this tapestry that we belong to, and strengthening those relationships, binding these people together, binding us to them. And we believe that our relationship in eternity will be as it has been on this earth. And so we see that as being an incredibly important work to do, and worthy of our time
Yeah,
and energy. And I have also found that as I connect with for me, my grandparents, my parents are still alive, but as I try to connect with my grandparents and those ancestors that come before me, I feel more grateful for the life that they made possible for me to live.
correct.
Right. And I feel my heart is drawn to them, like is stated in Malachi, the
Yeah,
hearts of the fathers do
turning
turn to
to
the
the children.
children, and the
Mm-hmm.
children's hearts turn to their fathers. And that family connection is so powerful, and only possible through the atonement of Jesus Christ, who overcame our own sins, imperfections, and mortal death.
Yeah. And I think that's the singular most important thing, really, that has got me through my grief. Sometimes it was only the thought of that got me through it. And I just, like, gutted it out. But I
Right.
don't believe that that's what grief is about.
Right.
I believe that grief is becoming and starting to understand more like the Savior. I believe that it is gaining empathy and understanding for others. Because really, when you're
Yes.
grieving, honestly, one of the only things that made me feel better is when someone would say, I understand how you feel because I've been through it. Because you don't have to try to explain anything to them.
Right.
And you look at them and you go, okay, well, they're still functioning members of society. Then there's hope in that.
Yes.
And bless their souls, there's a lot of people who try to help, and I welcome their help. But in the moment, it doesn't necessarily bring relief.
Right. And that's okay.
And that's totally okay.
Right.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
so that's a good point to continue to engage with someone who is grieving, even if your engagement is not going to take their grief away. Just being there and mourning with them, showing up with them, sitting with them in
Yep.
their sorrow and discomfort is of value.
And I think not putting expectations on what you think grief should look like. I don't think we ever get rid of grief. I think we grow into a more pure form of love, honestly. And I think it's the catalyst can be grief if we allow it to change the way we feel and see the world, and also the way we treat others. And I think that's the power that grief can have, not always. Because I think sometimes if we allow to sit in the pain and try to medicate it, I don't think that's healthy. Like medicating, meaning, alcohol and drugs
Right.
to excessiveness.
Right.
But I also think you need to give yourself grace, because we have preconceived ideas or notions of what grief is supposed to look like and how long we're supposed to grieve.
Right.
There is no time frame.
And grief is painful.
Oh,
Grief is very painful. But what I love that you brought out was the empathy and compassion that is one of the only gifts, I think,
that come from that.
that come from grief. Those
Yes.
experiences are so incredibly painful. And yet for me, it opened my eyes to see that there were others suffering
Yeah.
in ways that I had not recognized before.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for the eyes to see.
Correct. And sometimes it takes a minute for your eyes to be able to see and your
Yes.
ears to be able to hear. But I
Yeah.
believe that the process will eventually lead us, if we allow it to the same place,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
is would be a better world if we could all get to that point of giving each other leeway and mercy and grace and hope that the night has come, but the morning, if you allow it, will eventually come,
Right. Right.
So
That it's even symbolized in Christ's resurrection, which was not symbolic, but
right.
in a real and symbolic way. The dark night comes for all of us,
Yep.
but there is joy
Yep.
that can be had
Yeah.
in the morning.
Yeah.
Tia, this has been such a wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate you sharing you, all that you have from the grief that started with your twins and the grief with your father. And I appreciate the contrast with the very real shock, anger, those very negative things associated with grief that are real and
Right.
that many, many people experience. I'm thankful that you have been able to bring us through that into this dawn of discovery that you've had that really was only possible by traveling through the
Yeah.
grief.
You can't get there any other way. You can't go around it. You can't go under it. You can't go over it. You must walk through it. You have to walk through it to get to that morning, I guess you'd say, of light.
Well, could we finish here with the question that I ask everyone at the end? What do you think it means to grieve well?
When you kind of said that, this is going to be the last question, I pondered upon that and I thought, what does it mean? What does it actually mean? Because I don't think it has anything to do with physically correct or anything like that. And then I found this scripture, and for me, it kind of sums it all up. And it's Alma chapter 7, verses 11 and 12. And this is what it says: "And he shall go forth suffering pains and afflictions and temptations of every kind. And this, that the word might be fulfilled, which saith, he will take upon him the pains and the sicknesses of his people. And he will take upon him death, that he may loose the bands of death which bind his people. And he will take upon him their infirmities, that his bowels may be filled with mercy according to the flesh, that he may know according to the flesh how to succor his people according to their infirmities." I believe that's how you can walk through this and do it well, is knowing and following the pattern that as we are suffering and experiencing these things in mortality, it gives us the ability, if we allow it to move upon our soul, it gives us the ability to help others in their time of need and to succor and lift them in their times of trial and struggle. That's what I believe the outcome of doing it well actually is. Not time, not physical, but eventually that we move to that place. We walk the path that the Savior walked so that we may help our other brothers and sisters who are suffering and who have pain and who have affliction, and lift them and give them a helping hand and say, it's going to be okay. I promise you. And for that gift, I am forever grateful. Because like you said, you can't learn it any other way.
Thank you so much, Tia.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been very reflective for me, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for sharing. It's been a pleasure.